Hi folks, I am Liv, and thank you for coming down to my talk tonight, especially those of you who have come down from Houston. Thanks for making the drive. This work here, Water's Running High, is a series of works that I've been working through to focus on the familiar landscape, especially as that familiar landscape becomes unfamiliar. I knew I was going to get that far and then I was going to lose my train of thought. And so a number of these works are showing these shifting landscapes, and I'm very familiar with changing landscapes. As Dennis mentioned, me being from the Big Island of Hawaii, that landscape is changing pretty constantly. We have active volcanoes, hurricanes, big storms that will change the beach fronts, invasive species that will change the woods. So that changing landscape has been sort of part of my mentality for quite a while. But it's also something that has continued as I've moved into Texas, and of course, especially with Houston, we have a fair number of storms ourselves. I'm sure everyone knows about that big storm we had a couple of weeks ago. Houston Heights was one of the neighborhoods that was hardest hit, and that's where Burning Bones Press is, where I do a lot of my studio work, and I was actually at Burning Bones Press framing these pieces when that storm hit, and I was there by myself, and so I got to see that storm as it sort of whipped through that neighborhood. Power went out very quickly, so I'm standing in this studio by myself, lights are out, it's very quiet and very dark and very still in this studio, and so that contrast really hits me because I'm looking out these very large glass windows that are all down the front of that shop, and I'm in this still interior, but I can see this sort of frenzied whipping weather going on outside that is transforming my normal view through those windows, which is usually quite static and tranquil, and it's those lovely trees that line those streets and a great big southern house across the street. But as that storm really started to come through, it just turned into this nearly opaque swirl of water, broken branches, and leaves flying everywhere. And that contrast really hit me. And that contrast, you'll see, is really apparent in a number of my works as well, where there is maybe on the fringes of these environments a hint of a man-made structure, but it's always on the fringes. It's almost always about to be pushed out or consumed by this much more oiling, organic backdrop. So you'll see that in quite a few of these works. There's also, you're going to notice some kind of phenomena happening in a number of them. This phenomena is a signifier of the landscape's actions, the landscape gaining agency as we lose agency in exchange. So these are moments that are a present moment. You don't know what's going to come of them, but you know that something is happening and you're there to witness it, even if you can't fully understand it. And so when you're looking at these works, you're probably going to see a comparison as well between the different techniques that I work with. Sort of down these three walls, these are all works that have screen printing as their basis, and they're a little more free form. They come about in a more sort of intuitive fashion as I work through these pieces, and they're always very heavily pattern based. But then these pieces down these walls and the one piece out in the hallway, those are all etchings, and they are multicolor etchings. So if you're not familiar with etchings, I start with a copper plate, and I use acids to etch the imagery into the plate. And for every color that is in the print, you have to create a different plate to hold that color, because all of those etched sort of divots in the plate are going to get filled with ink. And you put a piece of paper on top and you run it through a press with very heavy pressure, so the paper gets embossed into the plate. You peel the paper up and it picks the ink up with it. So, you know, for these pieces, like say with this piece here, this is actually just 4 colors. This is a yellow, an orange, a light blue, and a very dark blue. And so each of those colors has to be etched separately, and they are printed one on top of the other. Okay. I do a slightly different technique than what you may usually see in etching. Normally, those are literally different plates that are being made, but I always start with a single plate, and I etch the first color and print that color on all my sheets of paper. And then I actually sand down the plate and I etch the next color. But when I'm sanding down the plate, I'm never completely cleanly sanding it down. There's always a little remnant of what used to be there. And so that's still my element of chance that comes through and creates some really interesting effects that maybe I can't plan for, but add a more unique feature to the print. So I kind of like that element of like a palimpsest. I love that word. Palimpsest is from ancient texts when paper or vellum was much more valuable and hard to come by. Sometimes they would erase what used to be written on them, and they would write new things over that, but you'd still see sort of an echo of what used to be on there. So that's sort of the lovely word that I like to think about as I'm creating these. You get that palimpsest of the previous colors and layers starting to come through. And so I'm happy to take questions, whether it's technique or concept. I know that we have some printmakers here, but even if you don't know anything about printmaking and you just want to ask me anything, please feel free. I'm a print nerd, and as Dennis mentioned, I'm a teacher, so I'm always happy to talk technique. Ooh, let me remember. There are, oh, there's yellow and red and green, and there's 2 different types of purple in there. So that's where it's called alu-pupe inking, where you're inking different parts of the plates in different colors. So there's a darker purple down here, and then there's almost this silvery purple up there. A lot of these terms kind of seem, I don't know, what's the right word for it? French, yes, definitely very French. I need to take at least like French 1, just so I can properly pronounce all the French terms, I'm sure. But you'll see other techniques like sugar lift and chinkole. Etching is such a wonderful world because there's so many different techniques that create beautiful, subtle, intricate effects in the final prints. Yes?
The 2 works behind you?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I didn't read the...
Oh, so these are screen printed monoprints. Okay. So these have a basis of screen print to them, and then they also have some hand painting in there as well, painting with acrylics and with watercolor. Yes, there is a lot of connections to my family. A lot of the source photos that I use are from when I go home, and I take a lot of photos, and I spend a lot of time at my mother's house, which is way out in the boonies. It's like on a hillside. If you squint, you can kind of see the ocean far away. But she is a real plant lover. She's got a green thumb, and she can grow just about everything. And so her big thing right now is orchids. She's growing a ton of orchids, and so these are all some different photos of the different orchids that she's growing. And a lot of these elements, like say this table here, is from her lanai, her porch that we often sit out on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us.